In this video, I'm going to guide you through the watercolor painting of a gorgeous weathered door with simple supplies and limited colors. The line art is available for you in the description as a free download so we can start painting right away. Hi, I'm Françoise. I offer tips and tutorials for realistic watercolor, oil pastels, and gouache every week. Make sure to follow me on Instagram to see what tutorials are coming to YouTube and suggest the ones you want to see. For supplies, I used Arches paper, cold pressed 100% cotton, 300 GSM. One round basic paintbrush can do, but two are even better, and if one of them is round and pointed at the tip, it's great as this will help for details. The colors I picked are very basic. One blue shade, preferably a light and bright one, then a yellow or orange shade, and finally a black or a gray shade and some white gouache or a white gel pen. All details for my supplies are listed in the description. Now on to our door. The first thing to do is to apply a base layer, and I'm starting with the door, but you could opt for the wall first, it doesn't matter. At this early stage, you want your paint to be very watery. Doing this will help us fix mistakes easily if there are any, and it's better to assess if you're heading towards the right direction and correct rather than starting with concentrated colors right away and being stuck with it if it turns out the colors are off or an area was painted when it shouldn't have, etc. With light base layers, we're safer and more in control. Before the paint dries, I add a little bit of burnt sienna randomly. In the end, I want a weathered door look with the main two colors showing, that of the paint on the door, in our case it's blue, and that of the wood, which is our orange or yellow or burnt sienna, whichever you picked. Make sure it's dry before starting on the wall. For the wall, same thing. We're going to use a watery mix of gray or black, since black and water looks more like gray. For now, we're simply painting all around the door, and we will refine this a bit later. Make sure this fully dries too before moving on. We have our base. Now we're going to layer using the same colors, only we'll add a bit more paint in the mixes. The purpose of layering is that our colors are not going to be applied in the exact same spots as they were previously. They're going to overlap, and this is going to create more depth and more color variations in the painting. When you repeat this kind of technique several times, it contributes a lot to making something look realistic. On the opposite, having just one block of the same color would look more cartoony. You'll notice I'm avoiding to paint areas that touch in one go because I made the edges of each panel in the door a bit darker, and I want to keep those lines and make sure they don't blend into the rest of the door. So while I paint this frame all around, the middle part is drying and I can move on to the rest of the door later. As always, we let it dry and then we move on to the wall so the painting keeps progressing as a whole. It's better than doing the door and then the wall separately because we're able to sync the way both look together better, if that makes sense. For this second layer on the wall, nothing too complicated as I'm just adding more paint, more concentrated than I did before, because the first layer was very light. Now I'm adding a third layer on the door with a thicker mix of blue paint, and again I try to make the edges of all the panels a bit darker and stretch that darker paint into the center of the panels with a clean and slightly wet brush. I'm not adding burnt sienna here, as it's just a layer to make shadows deeper and define those panels nicely. I'm doing the same thing on the wall, trying to accent the darker areas there with darker paints and stretch the paint on the other parts with added water to create a soft gradient. For example, on the door steps, we can define the looks of the normal steps as we perceive them by making some parts a lot darker. This is when you see layering is nice to create something that looks realistic. On the door, it's time to accent the shadows in the panels even more. Here we want more pigment in our mix once more, and if possible, it's going to be better to use a fine tip paintbrush. I'm adding fine details like the doorknob, a handle, and the separation lines between panels. I'm doing something similar on the wall by shaping each stone with dark gray paint, and to make it look more natural, you can apply this dark mix elsewhere on the stone and create a soft gradient towards the lighter parts with a clean and slightly wet brush again. I add splatters, lines, dots, just a little bit of detail to make it look more enticing. At this stage, all we need to do now is add texture and highlights. For the door, I used the dry brush technique, using both a concentrated thick mix of my blue shade and the same with burnt sienna. Here you can create textures you like, make lines, or just dry brush, splatter, or combine it all. Just try and know when to stop so it doesn't look like it's too much. If it looks great but you feel the urge to continue, maybe just stop now to be safe. We need to add some light and make contrast even better to contribute to better realism. I use white gouache for that. I add a little bit on the door and more on the stones as it's just gray and it definitely needs light. Now I'm adding a few white splatters on the wall and we have our door. I hope you enjoyed this short watercolor painting and gorgeous weathered door step by step. If so, please let me know and help this video being seen by others by liking, commenting, or sharing it. Also, please subscribe and turn on notifications to enjoy all my other videos and the future ones, and visit me on Instagram at blackfineart for even more. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.